Welcome to the Hazard Class Podcast. This is the podcast where I ask my stupid questions to some of the smartest people in and around the world of emergency services. My guest this week is an assistant fire chief with the Petaluma Fire Department. He has more than 25 years in the fire service with experience in municipal, rural, and wildland fire operations. He has served as a rostered operations branch director on California incident management teams and holds a master's degree in fire service leadership. With experience ranging from fireground to statewide wildland fire operations, he brings a perspective that blends street-level reality with executive-level responsibility. It's my pleasure to welcome Chief Chad Costa. Chief, thanks for joining me this morning.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. Yeah. Someone that I wanted to get on the podcast for a bit, so I'm happy to finally send you a message and you were right on it. So I appreciate your willingness to come on and chat. So a storied career in the fire service, 20 plus years now. I always want to start back at the beginning. So talk to me about your origin story, like why the fire service, what's the motivations to do what you do?
Yeah. Thank you. So essentially I grew up, I still live, but don't live in the same area, exact same area, but I grew up in Western Sonoma County here in California. It's 60 miles north of San Francisco. You have the city of Santa Rosa is the largest city and Petaluma being the second. So I grew up in Western Sonoma County, very rural on a ranch, basically raised with, a hardworking kind of a work ethic type family, middle class, just getting by and taking care of the ranch. I'm blessed to have that as my upbringing. I think that has a lot to do with my success in my career is just getting dirty and working hard and putting in the effort to earn the respect of those around you. So for me and my family, there was nobody that was in the fire service. I really didn't have any reason to end up as a firefighter. It was something I looked up to, but just kind of felt like it was probably something didn't know anything about it. Probably something I thought I wouldn't be good enough to do or whatever that was. But an interesting story on that is, growing up in Forestville was the town. One of my best friends was Brian Brush, who is very well known in the fire service. Him and his family, he grew up in Forestville as well. So we went to high school together, and Brian started around I think it was about 16, 17 years old. He started volunteering at the local fire department. They had a program where if you were in high school, I think it was if you were a senior in high school, you could get out of class if they had a call. Of course, there wasn't a lot of calls, but there were some here and there. And I just was watching him do this, and we had conversations, and he suggested that I check it out. And really, that's how this occurred. So I showed up I went and talked to the chief. He told me to show up. I think it was Wednesday or Thursday night drill. I can't remember. I remember walking up to the front door of the fire station, knocking on the door, nervous as heck, had no idea what to expect. And a very tall firefighter answered the door, mostly volunteer department. There was some paid staff. And he said, "What the F are you doing here?" And I'll never forget this. 27, 26 years ago. And I just, tried to politely said, "Well, the chief asked me to show up tonight. I'm a prospective volunteer." And he goes, "You're too small to be a firefighter." And he was joking. That was kind of the culture was, given it still is in the fire service. I think it's changed, and it kind of depends on what department you're in, but they were pretty rough on me, to be honest. And I can remember being pretty heartbroken at times during those first few days. But it also But also there was some truth to what they were saying. I needed to hit the gym. I needed to get stronger. I needed to work on the physical attributes of the job. So they weren't wrong, but it was for someone that came with no fire service experience or background, had no idea what to expect. It was a rough first day. I'll leave it at that. But yeah, I just fell in love like everyone else. When you're a kid and you don't really have a direction, I think at that point I was going to be an electrician. It just provided me something. It gave me something. I can't really explain the feeling. And I think everybody just kind of like, hey, this is fun. It's exciting. It's challenging. When you don't really have a super direct plan, I wasn't sure if I was going to go to college. I wasn't totally sure what I was going to do. It was like, this is for me. And it didn't take long for me to realize that it's something that I wanted to pursue. Whether I got it or not, who knows? But yeah, that's really my beginning story.
So from that first day or two, you come in and you meet this kind of wall of an unexpected, resistance, maybe you would call it. And then you obviously persist through that, right? You stay, you meet the resistance and you join this volunteer house, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
And so then talk to me about those early days where you're going through the training, actually going from a prospective firefighter to becoming an actual firefighter that's maybe seeing your first fire, what those experiences were like.
Yeah, I mean, it was exciting, man. I mean, I think that's the adrenaline of this job. Whether at that point, it was super exciting for me to go to a medical aid, a public assist, a tree down, any call was, I wish we could foster some of that as we get later in our careers, because burnout's a real thing, and people start to forget how much fun this job is, and then people start to ruin it. That's really what happens, is we ruin the job doesn't ruin us. I mean, to some degree, yes, our exposures and the things we see, I'm not going to dive into the mental health side of it with this speech. That's real. Wouldn't argue that. But I think there's a lot of things in the day-to-day of our job that we make worse, or we get down on, or we get negative on. And the reality is if you just rewind back to your question and rewind back to that first year of really, eye-opening experience of what this job's really about, and you remember how I felt and how we felt, it is a lot of fun. And I'd surely rather get up in the morning and go drive down and get on a fire engine and run medical aids than what I did before that, which was pour concrete and be soaking wet in the rain, doing construction. So, and thankfully there's people out there that do that, thank God. But my point is that this job is fun, and that's what it was for me. It was fun. It was exciting. I think like any job in any department and any rank you go in, if you walk in and you put in the effort and you have the heart and you care and you show up and you're reliable, and you truly do treat it like a friendship. We talk family. I think for the most part there is family in the fire service, but I also think there's just good friendships, whether they're working friendships or personal ones. When you do that, most people, unless you're a jerk or unless you just can't do the job or you're just incompetent or incapable, most people are gonna bring you in. And that's eventually what happened. It took, like everything, like every rank, like every job I've had, it took hard work and effort. And once they saw that I could do it, once they saw that I cared, once they saw that I showed up, then I was dedicated. It just became really a really cool friendship and a lot of fun.
How do you now, as a chief officer, seek to instill those values in your newest members?
Yeah, I think the fire service in general, we're kind of at a tipping point, or really a change. I was talking to a city manager yesterday, actually, and I was talking about this. With fire, at least in California, I'll speak for our department and our region. I don't factually know if this is true across the country, although when I was at the EFO and things like that, I did hear similar things from other chief officers across the country. hiring dual role firefighter paramedics is extremely challenging in today's hiring environment. In fact, if you're got your head on straight and you're a firefighter paramedic with some experience, you can pretty much write a ticket to just about any department in California. It's an amazing time to be a firefighter, and for those of you out there that want to do it in California, at least, if you have those things, it's a good chance you're going to get hired. But what I've seen with that is before this really like supply and demand challenge, what happens is, not really before, but really now, what happens is that departments kind of have to take anybody. And I don't mean that just in their qualifications, skill sets, and experience. I also mean geographically. And so we in this organization traditionally always in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, almost always hired people from the region, or at least the general area, for good reason. One being is that there was investment. The biggest one, there's investment in the community. They understand this a little bit about the city. Maybe they know a lot about it, but ultimately they have buy-in in the county and in this region. When we started branching out and taking just about, we have people that fly to work. We have people that drive 3 to 4 hours to get here. I noticed a little bit of a change. And what happens is that people just don't have, especially with busy lives and kids and sports, nobody's driving in 3 hours to come to the softball game or to that 2-hour event where we're, serving drinks or doing something for the community, whatever it is. Union meetings, things like that have gone virtual because nobody shows up. Very few people live in the area, which is understandable with traffic and drive times and all that stuff. But my point being, and what I'm trying to get to here is we really are losing that family close-knit atmosphere. And I think that's true for a lot of departments across the country. And that a lot of that's because we're not investing in, there's a couple of reasons, but we're not investing in those people in our communities. And the communities have become more expensive and almost impossible for especially single income people to survive and live. Mm-hmm. You're talking in this region, an apartment, a 1-bedroom apartment's $2,500 a month. It's hard for somebody, especially if you got a wife and kids. Now you're talking $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month. But so what I'm thinking is, and what I'm trying to get at here is, we need to come up with programs and ways to invest in people when they're younger, when they're in the kids in our communities that really have show passion and drive for this. And then what we do is we start to build that back. The ones that start showing up to the softball games, they start showing up to, hey, someone needs an emergency trade because their kid got sick. So they're here in a couple minutes so that person can go home. That brotherhood, sisterhood mentality can sort of come back. So we've tried to invest in these programs. We have a part-time BLS program for people 18 and older. There's departments that can hire people as recruits, give them a minimum income, but then support them to go to paramedic school and fire academies. Pay me now or pay me later. And really what it comes down to is I think, and I don't want to blame paramedicine. Paramedicine's been a big part of our increase in service, but because that's such a specialized certificate that takes so long to get and it's so expensive, we just don't have the people to hire from the region. So that's my long speech about how we kind of, and more focused on, I think it's just trying to do your best to have conversations with. It's just tough, it's just tough because if you live 3 hours away, no matter how good you are as a leader and no matter how much you want, that person's not going to drive 6 hours for a 1-hour meeting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that goes to talk about the hiring problem and the recruitment problem in the fire service in general. I mean, even in, the last decade or so that I've been in the fire service, we went from multi-thousand person hiring lists to a couple hundred people on the hiring list. What do you think it is about the fire service that's less appealing than it traditionally was? I don't know. The job doesn't seem to have changed, but for some reason, people are less interested in it.
Yeah, I'm definitely not going to be able to say I'm 100% factually, this is what it is. I think there's multiple factors. I think the world's changed. I think my kids and kids of these days aren't being raised as much on the blue collar mentality. They're being raised on more of a tech and an administrative world. So the fire service is not as attractive, like I grew up on a ranch, bucking hay and cutting trees. And so when I got in the fire service and they handed me a chainsaw and an axe and a bunch of different tools and ladders and stuff, it was already like, there wasn't many things on the fire engine that I hadn't seen before or hadn't touched. And those were fun to me. That was, I enjoyed that. So for my kids, my son's getting into the fire service, but he didn't grow up on the ranch. He didn't, I think maybe if I wasn't, in his life, I don't know if he would have done this job. And so that's part of it. Just the world's changed, less blue collar. We're not pushing our kids towards these type of jobs anymore. We're pushing them to college and tech jobs and things like that maybe do pay more. That's part of it. The other part of it is it's become extremely, and this might not be for every department, but let me just talk about ours. To be hired here as a firefighter paramedic, you're talking 5 years of school minimum, maybe earlier if you can fast track some things and get lucky. But 5 years is about what it is. You don't have to have a degree, but it's important. You got to have paramedic school. That's usually 1 to 2 years. You got to have the fire academy, which is competitive to get into and hard. And then, oh, by the way, you got to be able to survive during those, let's call it 3 to 5 years minimum. And how do you survive when rent's $2,500 a month? I really do feel like the pathway for kids to get this job is so limited to a certain demographic or my son's living in a house that he's not paying for. He's driving a car that he's not paying for. He's paying for insurance he's not paying for. He's paying a cell phone he's not paying for. Not every kid out there has that advantage. So how are they going to become firefighter paramedics if these organizations aren't bringing them in out of high school and saying, hey, we'll pay for your medic school. We'll pay for you. We just want you as being a good human being to come work for us. So there's a lot of it. I also think the fire service, just real quick, I also think the fire service hasn't done a great job of promoting itself. Let's be real. What do you hear about in the fire service? Like you hear about mental health, injuries. Yeah. We changed the retirement. Now we're telling kids it's not 50 anymore, and it's 57. It's not 3% at 50 anymore. It's 2.7. And we talk a lot about the negatives and the bad things we see. And so if you're a kid and you're really smart and you're thinking about this, do I want to go do a job that I'm probably going to have? I don't know. I've had 5 surgeries and, had to go see the chiropractor yesterday because I couldn't barely sleep. Do you want that job? And I do think in some ways that we've kind of hurt ourselves by being so transparent with some of the things that are tough about this job.
Yeah. And I mean, the advice I always give people when they're interested in the fire service is it's a career for you if it's the only thing you can do, not in terms of like you're not skilled enough to do anything, but if like the people that thrive in the fire service is like, this is the only job for me, right? Like the people that I really admire in the fire service, the people that I see having success are people that are like, yeah, I could do something else, but this is whatever they pay me, whatever the hours are, this is the thing for me. And that seems to be, there is adversity in the fire service. There's injuries and there's mental health and there's a higher risk of cancer. There's all these things that are negative, but truthfully, when you're inside the fold, the positives do outweigh the negatives, but you have to make a commitment to the idea that the positives are more important. Yeah. And so the thing I wanted to follow up with that is those programs are great. And even inside my organizations, we see some of those pipeline programs to bring community members in. How does someone in an administration go about approaching their city, their board, whatever it might be, to sell value in that financial investment into bringing community members in?
Yeah, and there, I mean, I'm sure that's the challenge with the fire service today and the world we live in is just me standing in front of you and telling you there's value is usually not good enough. I can promise you there's some value in any of those programs. It just depends on the program and the effort and the money and what your really goals are and what you're trying to achieve. But you have to have measurables. So for us, it was pretty easy. Look at stats. Look at how many people we're losing. So pull up their data and say, okay, this is our staffing, our minimum staffing. This is what we traditionally run at. Meaning, are you running short on people? Do you not have enough people to fill your positions? What's your recruitment numbers? What are you getting when you throw out this firefighter paramedic test? How many people are hiring? You know, for us, laterals, sometimes we might get 10. You know, it's not a lot. So if you think getting 10 applicants is enough for continuous open positions, that's pretty sad. And so you got to have data. And when we looked at, okay, how many members are we losing to other organizations? What are some of the reasons for that? Some of it's on us, some of it's pay, some of it's the fact they live 3 hours away and are driving past another organization that pays a little bit more. Why would I keep driving another 2 hours when I can stop, pull off the freeway in an hour? So you just got to look inside, look in the mirror. If all that's pointing you to what we're doing right now isn't working, you know, what kind of quality people are we getting? What kind of challenges are we having in our recruits? Then you got to look at you got to take a different path. And I submit that if you truly can build those pipeline programs that get people into your organization and they see how cool the kitchen table is and how cool it is to go help people every day and drive by a house and have kids wave at you, not flip you off. I think that's where you build that investment. They feel that investment and they have buy-in in the community, and you'll start to see the organizational numbers change. That's the only way to really do it is how are you doing right now, and do a deep dive into that.
Yeah. So to go back early in your career, right? You on that volunteer, how do you then progress from that volunteer house into having an actual career in the fire service?
Yeah. Well, in 20, it was a little different. You know, it's the environment has changed since I was doing it, for sure. I'm not a paramedic, so it was much more limited with opportunity. I happened to be in paramedic school when I got a job offer and took that job. I kind of regret that, because I think if I'd have finished paramedic school, it would have made me a better firefighter, and also would have opened the doors for maybe different opportunities. But that transition is really about building that resume as much as you can. And that's really pillared out into education, experience, certification, and licensing. And really, so especially in California, it's critically important that people don't give up on the degree idea. I'll dive into why I think that's important, but at least an AA degree. You know, I'm not saying everybody has to have a 4-year master's degree, but at least some type of degree. It's important for them to go through the path to firefighter 1, and it's important for you to go through the path to either EMT or paramedic. Highly recommend paramedic. But if you have those pillars and you add into that some experience, like your volunteer experience or intern or whatever you can find in a local or surrounding community organization, if you don't have that, get community service, get something that you can say, hey, I've dedicated some time in my life to give back. That's what we want to see, that hard work, that dedication, but you got to have the minimum quals. And lastly, I think it's really important, being the one that hires everyone here and has to go read the backgrounds and the polygraphs and the psychology exams and all the things that people have to go through. it's important to make good decisions outside of the fire service as well, and really try to do your best. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody, so did I. I get it. Nobody's perfect, but try to make good decisions so that when you're sitting in front of that background investigator and you're talking about poor decisions, they're things that everybody tried something or maybe made a poor decision at 18. We all get that, have a speeding ticket or something, but there's things that if you do, you're really going to put yourself behind the curve and getting the fire service. So it's just a well-rounded, like being a good person and try to meet people, try to get some coaches and some mentors in the fire service, walk into that local fire station and see if maybe be nice, bring them something and just say, hey, I'm interested in this job. You'd be amazed at how much information you can get and how much people will help you.
Yeah. So, tangibly in your career though, you kind of went into Wildland, right? And then you really ran the gamut of what the fire service does, right? And how did those various stops along the way kind of make you who you are now and inform you about, a lot? Like for me, I've done structured fire, only done structured fire, right? I know this much about Wildland. I know theoretically, but it's a whole different beast. It's basically a whole different job, and you've done both. So how do they work to inform each other?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably gonna be an unpopular opinion, but I love, my passion is more on the wildland side than the structure side. That doesn't mean I don't love crawling down a hallway and don't miss working the engine and the battalion chief position. Don't get me wrong, but there's something about wildland complexity that is so dynamic, and it's so challenging for a decision maker because there's just so many inputs and there's so many different things to consider. A structure fire, now don't get me wrong, there's plenty of structure fires out there that can be really complex and difficult, but for the most part, the day-to-day operations of a single family home fire is fairly boxed in and fairly straightforward. Yes, it's dangerous. Yes, it's hard work. Yes, it takes smart decisions and tactics and strategies. I get all that. But now, especially in California, we don't have really, there's not a lot of departments in California that have the option to say, hey, I just do structure. The reality is that we all, in the fires that we are having, everybody, just about everybody, or at least an engine from almost every department ends up there when you're talking million-acre fires and burning down cities. But that being said, they're very similar. It's just a completely different environment, and similar in the structure. We call them different things, but there's branches, there's ICs, there's operations, there's divisions, there's strike team leaders. It's ICS'd out, but it's much larger. When I was doing ops on the Eaton fire, early down in LA, whether it be the Tubbs fire here in Santa Rosa, I traveled to Lahaina for 30 days. The team went to that disaster. There's a human portion of this that's much more complex. When you're dealing with structure fire, you might have some families and some people displaced, but you're talking thousands and thousands of homes, people with loss of life, a fire that's still burning, trying to figure out where your priorities are, where you're going to put your troops, how are you going to structure this incident, what are your strategies, what's your priorities. It's a very, very, very dynamic and complex environment. And quite frankly, that's where I thrive. And I think a lot of fire service people thrive under pressure, and when all odds are against you and it's the worst situation, throw it my way. And so I'm not sure if I'm really answering your question, but you clarify for me, and I'll try to circle back to be.
No, I think that you're right there. It's just, I think when I think about the dynamic of both those two things, I think it's hard enough for a fire department to manage being proficient in one or the other. When you have an organization like yours, and a lot of them in California, where it has to be proficient in both, disciplines, where do you find the time, and how do you prioritize those things to be good at everything?
Yeah. And I think it might be, I hate to say this, but I don't think it's possible to be great at everything. I do think that this is what's amazing about the fire service is everybody brings something to the team. And when we send a type 3 engine out to a fire, there may be one, maybe two people on there that don't have a ton of wildland experience or maybe are limited, but there's usually at least one. And so what's really cool is when you're sitting in a fire engine, you got that firefighter in the back that maybe has only been in your department for a couple years. But oh, by the way, before he came to your department, he's worked on a hotshot crew for 3 years, did helitech, maybe a couple years of engine time. And his specialty or her specialty is that they have some really solid experience and knowledge in wildland. And so I'm not answering your question, but I do think that the reality is that it's really hard for us to be good at everything. Oh, by the way, we have ambulances and paramedics. So we're asking people to be structural firefighters, paramedics, wildland firefighters. And oh, by the way, we have USAR and everything else that there's, that there is available. But not every single person in this department is on the USAR team, is a seasoned wildland firefighter, a seasoned structural firefighter, and a seasoned paramedic. In fact, I don't think anybody is. But that being said, there are some on that engine company, there's going to be different levels of each of those pillars. And that's where we work together as a team and we communicate. And hopefully you have company officers that aren't ignorant, and hopefully you have company officers that are willing to listen to their crews so that we can all, make the best decision in whatever modality we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. So as you went through your career, I'm always fascinated to know this. It's like you obviously promoted quite a few times to land where you are. How does somebody know that it's time to promote and that they've they've outgrown the pond that they're in?
Yeah. I think there's two things that occur. One is that inside you say, hey, I'm ready for a change, or I'm ready for a new challenge, or I feel stagnant or bored, or whatever you're feeling. Or the other is the organization says it's time. And that is real. So for me, there's times when I promoted in this job where I was like, not sure if it's time yet. I'm not sure if I put in enough time in my current position. I'm not sure if I'm ready. I'm not sure if I want to. I'm not sure if I know enough. I think that's real. Like everybody always has a little, I hope you do have some humility, but sometimes the organization says it's time. And what I mean by that is there's a need in the department, there's a vacancy, there's a need, and you're going to be the best to fill that at that point. And you may not be 100% in on that or ready for it, but the department needs you. And I think that I've heard, some coaches of mine and people that I've listened to over the years talk about this. It's not always our decision. Like at the end of the day, yeah, of course you have to say yes. But sometimes you got to step up for the brothers and sisters of your organization. And sometimes the organization needs you in whatever role that is. And you may not be comfortable or 100% ready, but they make that call. And that's happened to me. I think both of those have happened to me. I've had both of those incidents where I was like, okay, I'll do it, getting a lot of pressure from labor and management because they felt like, I was the best option at that time for whatever position that was. So it's twofold.
Yeah. And so when you, especially as you ascend to the height that you are at now, how does someone at the top of the organizational chart stay in touch with the people at the bottom as to not lose sight of the actual work that's being done?
Ooh, yeah, man, I wish I was better at that. There's a lot of things that when I go to listen to people and talk about work-life balance is a huge one you hear, which if anybody's got that figured out, please let me know. the other is what you're talking about really, and the fact that there's so much push and pull in this job. Like if you look at what I'm responsible for, I always tell people I drive down a 10-lane freeway every day in LA, and all I'm doing is just changing lanes every minute. When I get off this, I'll change lanes back to work. I'll be talking about EMS. The next minute I'll be having a training discussion. The next minute workers comp. The next minute hiring. The next minute promotions. The next minute some type of community event. The next minute, oh, by the way, it's budget season. It's ridiculously difficult to stay on track with everything because you're constantly changing lanes, and it's almost impossible to you to focus a bunch of time on one lane. Oh, and by the way, you want to stay connected with the troops. I've gone through ebbs and flows of being good at that. I think one of the things that helps me personally is my position does get an opportunity every once in a while to help out the BCs, so I can work down for regular pay, basically, or their pay. I can work down and cover a shift here and there. I try to do that as much as I can. I think that's important. Obviously, there's the obvious answers to this. Do your best to get your butts in the fire station and face to face with people. I try to do things like, when people are out on workers' comp, send messages every once in a while, just saying we're thinking about them. It's their birthday or some side of anniversary with the department. Do your best to reach out. If they accomplish some cool goal, like they become a truck driver or acting captain or something, shoot them a message or give them a call and say a personal, hey, congrats, nice job. Those are all little things that I try to do. But I'm going to end that question with something that's really important for everybody to understand. If you haven't earned the respect of the organization in any rank you've been in, you sure as hell ain't going to be successful with this when you get to an upper level position. And the reality is the work is done earlier on in your career. The work is done way before you put the skis on and start crossing them and adding them. It starts as a firefighter and as a probationary person in your organization. If you build that foundation, when you get to these positions, people give you more grace and people give you more of a space to understand that you're busy and you're getting shit done because that's what you've always done. They're seeing progress. They're seeing, efforts being put in. So for me, I'm hoping and hopeful, although that comes and goes a little bit depending on the environment of the organization. For me, I'm hoping that all that hard work and foundation, helps with some of that and a little more grace if I don't make it by the fire station, this week. But the reality of the fire service is that it is what have you done for me lately kind of environment a lot of times. Yeah. And even though, you've invested, and this is hard, but even though I've invested my life, lost my divorced and all the other things that have gone wrong in my life, certainly a contribution to that is how much time and effort I put into this career. The reality is that there are people out there that, don't like me or maybe don't think I'm a good leader and things like that, because it just is what it is. And it's really hard. It's really hard to invest so much into an organization and keep that morale about you and yourself all the way up, but stick with the core basics, be a good human, understand people, are all going through things, communicate, be nice, all that hard work ethic and drive throughout since probation will sort of, I think, set you up for more success than failures.
You bring up a point that makes me wonder, which is as you ascend, right, there's less people above you to theoretically be giving you feedback and job performance, analysis and stuff. How do you sift through the feedback, positive and negative, to adjust the course once you're up that high, right? Because you probably don't have a lot of people directly telling you what to do or that you did this good or you did this bad. A lot of it is taking in all the input from the 1,000 voices and trying to figure out what's true and what's false and then adjust course based on that. How do you go about doing that?
Well, I think there's something about leadership, and that's humility and self-reflection. And what I'll share is that, and I want to dive deeper into that because that's a good question. But what I'll share is many times before anybody comes to me and says, "Hey, you didn't handle that situation maybe the way I would have expected," or maybe I'm frustrated because you didn't hear me out, or whatever the situation is. Many times before I ever hear that, I'm already thinking it. I've definitely had plenty of moments where I walk out of the room and go, or lay in bed that night at 3 o'clock in the morning and go, man, I didn't handle that right. And the biggest thing you can do, and you can't do this all the time because, if you're this type of person that's always calling every week to apologize for your attitude or your comment or how you handle the situation, after a few times, no one cares, you're just talking. So you got to actually mean it and actually try to be better at whatever that thing is. But it's humility, it's self-reflection, and it's follow through about following up with those individuals and saying, hey, this isn't how I should have handled that, or this is, I didn't like how I reacted to that scenario. And then finishing up with your question, though, I think it's important to listen to everybody, but everybody has people in your organization that you listen to a little bit more. And when the union president calls and says, hey, in that meeting, it seemed like you were irritated or off, because I'm going through some tough times in life or whatever the reason was, I listen. And so there are people in the organization at all levels. And I mean, EMT, paramedic, engineer, captain, battalion chief. There are people within that group that I built those relationships with, that they can call me and say, hey, here's something negative or positive. And I got to listen. But I think it's important for everybody out there. Part of the challenge is if you listen to everything and you take everything to heart, this job will tear you apart. Mm-hmm. And I've had, don't, I'm not going to sit here in front of you and tell you that it's been all peachy and perfect for me. Trust me. I've sat there with my head on the table going, like, why does this person feel this way? Or why did this person say that? Like, that's not who I am, or that's not what I meant. You can defend yourself, but if you try to defend everything and you take everything to heart, it will tear you apart. Because I can finish up an amazing project, and it is something that's taken multiple years of work and effort, and everybody celebrates because it's a great thing. And a month later, somebody's going, I haven't seen Chad. What's he doing? Lazy chief or whatever it is. I'm making that up, but that's just the way it is. It's like it's never enough. It's never ending. And when you're gone, someone else is going to step into that and keep going the same pace. And that is very difficult. Executive leadership in the fire service with an A-type personality fire department that's constantly on the internet and constantly willing to, give you a thumbs up or thumbs down is a challenge. But keep to your core, keep moving forward, keep doing things, keep working hard, show that you care about the people, and you can make it through.
So that kind of perfectly lends into department morale, which is not only the individual's morale, but the department morale as a unified pulse. And the question of where that originates from. Is it a thing that is managed at the company level? Is it a thing that's managed on the BC level or an organizational level or some bit of all of them? But say somebody's in disrepair, a department's in disrepair in terms of that morale. How would someone go about fixing that?
Well, I think it would be unfair to say that it's at one level or the other. I think each individual organization, if you analyzed that morale, cultural challenge that they're going through, many times I think you could probably dial it in to certain levels or certain individuals. that being said, I feel like it's a holistic problem. Typically, it's not just one individual, and you replace that one individual, and everything's perfect. If it's gotten to that point, there's probably some other challenges and some issues that are going on at other levels in the organization. So I do think that the fire chief, the executive team of an organization, their vision, how they treat their people, how they communicate, how when they make decisions, are you making your decisions solely off your opinion, or are you bringing in labor and other people into the conversation so that your decisions are as best as possible. What the department feels is the best decision. Nothing pisses me off more than a fire chief that solely makes decisions for the organization. That always just bugged me to death. It's like, what made you God? Like, what made you know every situation, every answer to every problem or question? Because I sure as hell don't. So when I go one more ski on my up here, that makes me know everything. And I think that's in general where things can go wrong, when labor and management are two separate entities and they both are only looking out for themselves. Fractures occur. When labor and management work together and communicate, and when there's understanding and meet in the middle on both sides, that's generally when we have progress. That being said, there's always outside factors that sometimes we can't control. Pay, contracts, call volume to some degree. Yes, we can add more equipment to the road. That's $1.52 million a year of the city or your department's budget. Do you have that? Can you raise more money through taxes? So my point being is I don't think it's solely on any side. I think every situation you have to dive into every department. You might find that there are individuals or individual ranks that are a core cause of it. And typically that's labor or management. And typically that's one side saying, we're more important than the other side, and what we want is the only thing we're going to land with. And if you don't give us that, we're going to fight each other. Mm-hmm. That's typically where I've seen kind of the fracture in the organization.
I think sometimes things get fractured also based off of a dissonance in what we are, in terms of especially as the fire service becomes more business minded in terms of managing a budget and producing income via transport service or whatever it might be. You say, well, what are we? Are we a ambulance service that generates money for the city, or are we a municipal service that offers something to the community? And balancing those two things and making decisions not just for the sake of how much more revenue can we generate, but also like what services do we provide and what's the wear and tear on the humans that are doing it? How do you find a balance in that?
Yeah, no, so it's a very, very, very good question, and something very relevant to California's fire service. And again, I just can't speak for all the other states, but in the 80s, many fire departments like ours started transport ambulances and dual role paramedics. And why did they do that? Well, back then there wasn't a lot of calls. And guess what? If there was a medical aid and you wanted somebody to go to your mom or your sister or your wife or whatever to go to the hospital, there might be one ambulance in the general area. And if it wasn't busy, you're lucky they'd be there in 10 or 15 minutes. And if they were busy, you might see an ambulance in 20, 25 minutes. So the fire department said, this is unacceptable and this is a shitty care for our people that we serve. And so we're going to try this thing called dual role ambulances, and we're going to get 9 new firefighter, well, let's say one ambulance, 6, say two people on each ambulance. Let's say 6 new firefighter paramedics out of this. There's going to be more firefighters on duty. There's not that many medical aids, so they'll be available a lot. If we get a structure fire, they get to show up and throw an SCBA and turnouts and help. because we don't have enough firefighters either. And we'll get some revenue that's going to pay for them. Fast forward 2026, Petaluma Fire runs almost 9,000 calls a year. Many of those are medical aids. Yes, we've gone from 1 to 3 ambulances, but burnout and driving these paramedic firefighters into the ground is real. And oh shit, by the way, that ambulance brings in $5 to $7 million a year, those ambulances. Mm-hmm. And if we get rid of that, do we lose 18 firefighters? I mean, what's the cost of losing that income? Because that income is paying for those positions. Mm-hmm. And so unless the city has a way to kind of cover that cost, or unless you reduce your amount of firefighting force, which no one wants to do, you get in this push and pull. What do we do? And that's exactly where our fire department is right now. We have a group of people that would love to see us transition to single role paramedics. We have some people that really enjoy transporting. I would say there's more people that don't than do. Why? Because they're up 3 to 5 times a night. Mm-hmm. All that being said, I don't have the answer, because ultimately it's a huge challenge for us is to recruit and retain dual role firefighter paramedics that know they're going to have to work on an ambulance. There's a lot of people out there that would rather drive 20 more minutes to the north to an organization that pays about the same and only have to ride the engine in the truck. I get that. The challenge we are right now is I'll submit that we provide the highest level of service, I think, in the county to our constituents and the people that are here. I've been to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of calls as an engine captain or an engineer or a firefighter, working with side by side with an ambulance that shows up with the same patch, the same people that I just spent 2 days with or many years with. And I can tell you with no doubt that the way they operate on scenes and the quality care that they provide is better in the, maybe not every single incident, but I'm saying is better than privatizing ambulances and dealing with, private ambulance companies coming in and running calls in your community. So it's like, I know what you're saying. It's like you're killing your people, but then you're providing this high level of service. But then if we get rid of this to help our people, where do we find the money? Do we lose positions? Do we have to fire people or lay people off? It's an extremely challenging question for every organization, because the call volume is ridiculous. And that's what needs to be fixed, is we need to stop going to 4,000 calls a year for toe pain. We have really hurt ourselves, and the fire service was a part of this by the 911 era. Hey, just call 911. The fire department will come for anything. Mm-hmm. And literally what happened? Everybody calls 911. Everybody calls it for everything. Your door is stuck, or it's literally everything. And it's like now we put ourselves into this business where we kind of want to think about getting out of it, because we want to do like a lot of departments are doing and say there's an ambulance side of the house and there's a fire side of the house. Let's split it up. Let's focus on each. And I commend the organizations that have been able to do that, because I do believe that that's the right direction to go in. But how do you do it, and how do you find the funding and don't lose any jobs is the tough part.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the money is the hardest part of it, I think. And so as you think about the future of your organization or the fire service, is that, and you kind of just touched on it, but is that the solution? If we theoretically can't fix the dispatch problem, I mean, I would love to think that we could, but everyone that I've talked to, and now it's quite a few people, doesn't think the dispatch problem's getting solved anytime soon. How do we fix it on our end if we can't fix it on their end?
Yeah, I think this, Sacramento, Berkeley, Sacramento, there's a ton of organizations out there that are starting to go away from dual role ambulances and go into a single role program. I did my EFO project on it, written articles, done podcasts on that transition, did a lot of research, talked to a lot of people out there, and traditionally, or I would say substantially more people that are paramedics in this job would prefer it to be separate, meaning all under the best way to do it is to have it under the umbrella of the fire department so that you can keep control. And what's most important is what's amazing about fire department control about EMS and transport is many times when we make decisions at Petaluma Fire, we think about what's best for the constituent, not necessarily what's best for our pocketbooks. We're not a for-profit department. Our goal is to come out even. Our goal is to pay for the service that we provide and recoup that money, which sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. At the end of the day, we'll make decisions to waive bills for things that no private ambulance would ever do, but it's the right thing for the specific scenario. And I think if you analyzed our 3 ambulances, they would absolutely, because I know this is factually true, they would absolutely say things like, just at night, drop down to 2 ambulances, maybe at midnight, drop to 2 ambulances, bring another ambulance back on at 7 a.m, because data shows you don't need 3 at night. Well, guess what? We keep 3 every night, and we sure as hell ain't doing that. Why? Because if those nights where there are calls, having that 3rd ambulance does relieve some time of our crews and does keep people a little more rested. The other is that they're firefighters too, and fires happen at night as well. They don't just happen in the mornings. So anyways, I guess what I'm getting at is I do think organizations that are single role, when they start getting to that call volume, they either need to add more resources or they need to start really analyzing what's the availability of trying to go to a single role ambulance system.
So as we start to wrap up here, 27 years in you are now? Something like that?
I think March it'll be there. Yeah.
Okay. How many more do you have to go?
Oof. Well, I was going to do 5 more. I was going to hit 50. But there's been some changes in my life. So probably a little bit more than that, but 50 is the minimum. So
okay.
5 more for the minimum.
Okay. And so, when you look back retrospectively over the career thus far, what are some of the things that you're most proud of being able to put your stamp on?
Yeah, that's good. That's a good one. I don't know. I don't know. I think I thought about this, and I wrote about this the other day, and I was saying a high school. So here in Petaluma, I created what we call a high school career camp. It's something that basically is unique. A lot of people do these camps and these things for kids and girls camps and all these really cool things. But what was different about ours is there's a section, a good portion of the day that these kids come to the station. A good portion of that is conversation and documentation that they get to take home on how to get a job in the fire service. And I think that's super important. I think there's just so many kids out there, so many people that don't know anything about the job, but and parents. That how many people have came to me and said, hey, my kid's interested in fire service, but where do I start? What do they do? It's such it's not to us because we went through it, but it is such a complex process. Where do you get these fire technology classes? Where do you get the Firefighter 1 Academy? Where do you get EMT, first responder, paramedic? And how do I do that? Where's the links? Where's the schools? Who do I talk to? We tried to put together a document that kind of pushes, helps people that they can take home. So sometimes I really look back, there's so many things I'm proud of, whether it be accomplishments to better the organization, whether it be opportunities for people, that opportunities that I would have loved to have when I was younger, being able to bring those to the organization and see people thrive in those opportunities. There's a lot of things that I could say, but I do think that when you walk away from this and you look back, what have you done? What are the things you've done to better the organization in the future and for the people that work in the organization? And sometimes I lean more towards those recruitment and retention things, those things that keep people here and those things that make people want to come here. And that high school career camp was, humility comes out in me. I'm like, it's not that big of a deal. But the reality is when a mom or a dad comes up to you or sends you an email or a kid does and says, hey, thank you for doing this. And 3 years later, you're seeing them sit on an oral board panel for your BLS program or something like that. And then 3 years later, you're seeing them getting a full-time job and they're reaching out to you saying, hey, thank you for investing in me and taking the time to talk to me and giving me that document or whatever you did. Those kind of programs are something that are hard to kick off the top of the list.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. So much knowledge, so much wisdom, so much experience. And I appreciate you sharing some of that with me today.
You got it, Jake. Anytime.